Let's see. Is this somewhere you're interested in answering questions about tabletop RPGs and such, or are you keeping it video game focused here? No, you guys can ask me about tabletop RPGs, whatever you want to talk about. It's fine. I've been meaning to ask on Twitter for a bit. Did you ever feel pressure of following through with CH when it got going? I've recently been a victim of my own success with paid GMing, and I'm suffering the burnout. I guess I never wanted to stop doing critical hit, but I did get pretty burnt out on like the Void Saga specifically, right? So critical hit, the podcast, Void Saga, the actual game we were playing, um, and really the way we handled it, I think everybody got pretty burnt out through and at the end of Lords of the Feywild, so season 3. So yeah, we got pretty burnt out, and the way that we dealt with it is by taking a very long break from the Void Saga. You can hear that in the podcast because at the end of the season we stop playing the Void Saga and then we play actually a bunch of other games before we get back to the Void Saga, right? And we kind of learned that that's what we had to do. So in between each off season, which we don't really call them that anymore, but between every uh, Void Saga season, um, we started taking longer breaks just because it's an intense game that's like emotionally taxing. It's meant like fourth edition is very like mathy and like mentally taxing, and people get burnt out. And it's like everybody's having fun, but you can get burnt out of something that's fun, right? Burnout is very tough to handle. The only surefire way to stop burnout, if you're a game master, is to stop playing the game. You can play something else, and especially if someone else is running and you're playing, that'll help. But the number one surefire way to avoid burnout is to stop the game, right? You stop the game, you go a few weeks, a month, 2, 3 months, like your stuff is going to start coming back to your brain. You'll start thinking about the game and being like, oh, I can do this or I can do that, right? It's like you'll start getting that back once you stop. So if you're a professional game master, I'm not sure how big like the commitment to any given game is, like how long of a time. Like if you're like, we're going to run this game for like a year or we're going to run this game for like 10, 15 sessions or whatever, um, you're going to have to start writing that into your uh, contract or into like the way that you arrange for things, right? You're going to have to say, okay, I'm going to line up this game or these 2 games or these 3 games, and once game X finishes, I'm not going to pick up a new game. I'm just going to let that rest. And then once game 2 finishes, I'm just going to let that rest. And once game 3 finishes, I'm just going to let that rest. I'm going to take a small vacation and then I'm going to get back to it. And I know that's less income, right? Um, but when you're in a creative endeavor, especially a creative endeavor that puts so much pressure on you to come up with stuff, I like burnout is dangerous. It's actively dangerous, right? Because if your game starts declining, then your clients aren't going to want to play your games. So, I don't know. Being a professional game master is the Wild West, right? As a professional on-air game master, right? I don't go to people's houses and run games for them, but I do run a game professionally on air, or I have for a long time. Um, it's tough. It's been so weird. Basically, I ended up running an extra season of a game that everyone loved, but the first season was very heavily homebrewed and had an intended end point. When they asked for season 2, I was delighted, but then couldn't find the strength to keep creating it. Cue 12-hour days of writing and being miserable. Yeah, that's the thing. And like it's exactly that. Homebrew material requires a lot more thought. If you were running things right out of the like Eberron or, uh, Pathfinder source material, that would be a lot easier because you'd just be like, okay, well, they're going to go to this city called Arborsmirch or whatever, and do X, Y, or Z, and that's fine. You didn't have to come up with the city. You still have to come up with how the city feels and describe it and stuff. But a lot of that stuff's going to be there still. If you're creating a setting from scratch, it is extremely difficult. Um, it's just it's a lot of work, and it doesn't seem like a lot of work, and when you're doing it and you're excited about it, it still doesn't seem like a lot of work, but you realize that it has been a lot of work, like the moment that like your body tells you, like you sit down to do something and you're absolutely exhausted, like you're not tired, you just woke up that morning and had your coffee, but you sit down to write and you feel like your face is just gonna fall off of your head, right? And it's like that's what burnout is. Suddenly you realize that actually you're putting tons of work into this, right? It's like when I was running the Void Saga, I would spend hours of every day thinking about the Void Saga because that's what I've always done, thinking about role playing games. But the role playing games I ran ended anywhere between after 0 sessions to after maybe 10 sessions. I had run some like longer games, but because they were in college, they necessarily had breaks in them because of summer vacation, right? It was like um, everybody that I knew traveled there to go to college and then went back home, so the game couldn't continue. That was a built in break to my games that I never really thought of again until I ran the Void Saga continuously, and I was like, oh my god, like my brain just feels absolutely cooked anytime I try to come up with something. Um, it's like it's all still there, and I was able to do it, but by the end of Legacy of Ghosts, I was really burnt out. Um, and in fact, part of the reason for that is that I wanted the characters to continue to do things during the uh, time break during the time skip. So I basically ran 5 individual play by post games with each player, and it gave me no time to rest, right? I was like constantly still engaging with the material of the game, and basically it didn't allow my burnout to recuperate between seasons. So by the end of that season, like I was like, "Oh my god, I need to take a huge break." And I think Steven either could see it in me or even he like we never really talked about this, but I think he himself was probably a little burnt out. So we took a very long break, and that's why kind of like our between season breaks have gotten longer and longer is to account for that. To account for that burnout and also to account for scheduling, which, as you guys know, is always the number one killer of role playing games. As someone who doesn't have to be creative as a job, I can't imagine the hit that that would take. Yeah, it's actually really tough. When you get burnt out, everything starts to decline, and you, if you don't know what burnout is, like if it's the first time that you're experiencing it, like you don't know what's happening, right? It's like if you've never had a migraine, like the first migraine you have, you're like, I am dying, like I'm going to die, and like you're probably not going to die. Um, you know, or yeah, if you've ever had like an inner ear infection and you lose your balance, you're like, oh my god, what's happening? You know, um, burnout is like that. There's nothing like burnout. Like I can describe burnout to you, but you don't know it until you feel it. And if you don't know what it is, it causes you to like question a lot of things about yourself. You're like, oh my god, I thought I was like such a creative person, but now I can't do this. You know, and it's like, no, you still can. You just need a break. You just need to like take care of yourself for a little bit, um, and you'll be fine.